welcoming you for our second leg of our free webinar series of IDM Nations Campus and Buckinghamshire University College of Legal Studies gathering here with some expertise knowledge and giving you the understanding about certain aspects of law. So introducing myself, I'm Anushika Ilangasinghe, the Program Director of IDM Nations Campus. So we do have today with us a well-learned panelist who are expertise, or we could say who has a knowledge of legal background in and around like an awareness about what sort of violence that are taking place in this part of the world, and how what is the legal framework that captures those activities, and what are the background, what is the background we have to mitigate the violent actions that are taking place. So in the beginning of this particular month of May, we had a session on fundamental rights. So there we spoke about fundamental rights, or the core rights of an individual living in this country, as well as we went to the certain aspects of human rights as well. But also towards the end of this month, we decided to bring you some awareness about quite a bit, we could say an unpopular topic, but still for all, domestic violence is something that is happening, which is not heard much, because so much so it happens to a particular set of crowd, and it is unheard. So let's hear from the expertise what sort of violences that take place, and what sort of remedial grounds or the actions are being established through the legal systems in Sri Lanka, as well as outside Sri Lanka as well. So joining with us today, we have Mr. Sapumal Bandara, attorney at law and former chairman of Junior Bar Committee of Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Sir, warmly welcome you for today's event. And he's an expertise who would explain you mainly the concepts and the legal framework, and he have so much of inputs to give out to you all. And apart from sir, we also have Ms. Eranga Disanaika, one of another panelist. She's an attorney at law, as well as the founder of Earthmates Foundation Sri Lanka. Welcome you, Ms. Eranga, for the forum. And also we have with us Mr. Gimhan Surya Bandara, who's attorney at law and the founder of Colombo Debating Society. And also today's session will be moderated by Mr. Ruin Mapa, who is also the founder or the CEO of Sri Lanka Agripreneurs Forum and head of business operations at Lanka Coffee Association Publics, and he's also a public speaker and a coach as well. So Ruin, I would like to hand over the session to you to take control of the session and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anushika, for that kind introduction. And good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on domestic violence. I'm your moderator, Ruin Mapa, and I'm here to facilitate a conversation for you to learn more about this very important and timely topic. There's this very wise saying by Ms. Asunta Harris, who's a famous author. It is that overcoming abuse doesn't just happen. It takes positive steps every day. Let today be the day that you start to move forward. And following those wise words, let today be a day where all 67 participants who are joining and counting take a step forward to fight domestic violence. And for you to fight domestic violence, you should be aware of what it is and the current legal framework surrounding it. And that is why we're taking up this very timely discussion today. So ladies and gentlemen, domestic violence is a serious problem that affects millions of people around the world. It can take many forms, including physical, emotional, and financial abuse. Domestic violence can have a devastating impact on victims and their families and even their communities. So as Ms. Anushika rightfully mentioned, we are fortunate to have three experts on domestic violence with us today. Our guest speaker is Mr. Sapumal Bandara, an attorney at law with over years of experience and a prominent figure when it comes to making a system change in this country. He will be sharing his insights on the legal aspects of domestic violence. We'll also be joined by Ms. Eranga Disanayaka and Mr. Gimhan Surya Bandara, both attorneys at law with extensive experience in the respective field. So they will be sharing their perspectives with regards to this topic, especially on the lines of the point of view of a law student, which will be applicable to most of you in the audience. And ladies and gentlemen, you may have seen a small announcement being made through the chat, which is that you are free to raise any questions that you want, so that you can get your questions clarified with our eminent panelists. And you have two options of bringing your questions. You can first put your questions in the chat box, as a message clearly instructs you to do so right now. You can put it on the chat box, or you can wait till the end of the session where we have a Q&A session, and you can raise your hand where we will be giving you the opportunity to raise your question. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us dive deep into the main substance itself. I would like to ask this question from Mr. Sapumal Bandara. Sir, I think when it comes to domestic violence, or when it comes to any legal matter for that matter, right, there is this very big fundamental issue with regards to the definitions, because certain things have gray areas, and that is not really conducive for a discussion like today. So in order for us to have a solid foundation for today's discussion, I would like to ask from you, how would you define domestic violence, and what are the different types of domestic violence that are out there?
Thank you, Ravin. Thank you very much for the introduction. And as you said now, definition of domestic violence is fundamental, because in order to move forward from we need to know the definition first. However, I do not wish to share the textbook definition, because there is no such textbook definition for domestic violence. As you said, it involves many abusive conduct, many abusive behaviors. So you cannot just it to a few more lines to have a textbook definition. So basically, what domestic violence is, it comprises, or it contains many aspects, where it can be emotional abuse, it may be physical abuse. Now, in some more sophisticated societies, it may be technological abuse, economic abuse, psychological abuse. So all these violent conduct or violent behavior towards a victim would constitute the domestic violence. So now, in order to give you a small insight about the Sri Lankan context, or our domestic context, now we have a legislation for to prevent domestic violence in the country. So that is Act number 34 of 2005. In that act, domestic violence is defined as psychological and physical abuse of a victim by a relevant person. So I do not wish to define all these terminology or these legal jargons at this moment at the outset, but that is for how domestic violence is defined in our legislation. That is, basically, it covers physical abuse and also emotional abuse by a relevant person to a victim. And also that domestic violence can happen in a home environment and outside. But what is important is this abusive conduct, or this violent conduct should arise upon a personal relationship. So we will discuss these matters further during our discussion. So basically, the definition or the definition that we all can agree is that domestic violence is nothing but physical or emotional abuse towards a victim by a relevant person within a home or outside home, arising out of a personal relationship.
Thank you very much, sir. And also, just a small announcement to the audience. We have a few questions that were drafted for you. So the questions will be shared using a poll right now, and you'll be given around 5 minutes for you to answer those questions. So as we move on to the next question, you take your time, and you can see the questions on the screen now. So as we move ahead with the conversation, please feel free to share your opinion in those questions through the poll. And it does not require a lot of legal knowledge. These were questions drafted by Mr. Sapmal Bandara, and he clearly pointed out that these questions do not require a lot of legal knowledge. It's just something that, could be answered with the knowledge that you already have as a law student or as someone who is not even a law student. So please, as we go ahead with the conversation, take 5 minutes of your time to answer those questions. And now let us resume back into the conversation. So, Sir, I think you gave us a wonderful example of how domestic violence could arise, right? And I think two key points that you mentioned was the fact that it is carried out by someone who is maintaining a close relationship with you. And second, it could happen within the vicinity of your house or even outside as well. So I think this kind of brings up a very important question with regards to how it can be enforced. So when it comes to the legal framework and the enforcing of different, the enforcement of the said legal framework, what are the different challenges that you have recognized as throughout your years of experience?
Yes, Ruin, honestly, there are many challenges. Now, one thing is that now this law was introduced to our legal system, let's say about nearly 2 decades ago, that is in 2005. However, so far, the awareness of this particular law is little low among the concerned societies. Well, I will put it in this way, that is now most of these domestic violence is taken place now, irrespective of the economical or economic standards, societal or social standards. This domestic violence happens everywhere. But now a particular segment of the society is aware of this law to prevent domestic violence. So they use this domestic violence law to prevent domestic violence or to redress any kind of a harm or damage caused to them. However, unfortunately, a majority of the people, especially those who are frequently subject to domestic violence, are unaware of this law and how far it can be utilized to curb or to prevent domestic violence. So that is this lack of public awareness is one of the key factors in our country, where now, since because of this general unawareness of this law, you cannot achieve the objectives of the law. So that is one of the key factors I see. However, now as far as the legislation which had been enacted by the Parliament is concerned, I think it is very comprehensive. Now I will do a small comparative analysis of this domestic violence law in Sri Lanka with some of the laws which are applicable in or which are currently in force in some of the other countries. Now, whereas now in Bangladesh and in India, they do have similar pieces of legislation. But now, take for an example, Indian legislation, prevention of domestic violence, it is only focusing the women. And in India, this particular act is called prevention of domestic violence of women, or it's basically gender biased, and it is only focused on women. And in Bangladesh also, the situation is similar. It is violence against women, VAW. So in comparison, in Sri Lanka, our Domestic Violence Act does not restrict the application to a particular gender. So it is a gender neutral act we have. So as far as the law we have in our country is concerned, it's more advanced and its applicability is more wide when you compare to other neighboring jurisdictions. And when you compare the law which is enforced in Sri Lanka with some other sophisticated jurisdictions like USA and UK. Now, take for example, in UK, you don't find a particular act to prevent domestic violence, but they have series of legislation, and also they have federal laws, and there are the state laws which are maybe different to the states. Now in some states you have prohibition of, like, if you find guilty of domestic violence, that now that in United States the firearms are freely available, so you can purchase a firearm at a grocery store. But now if you are found guilty of domestic violence, you will be banned from buying a weapon also. So there are more advanced and more broader laws in some other jurisdiction. But there is a reason for that also. Now let's when you take India, for example, the Indian society and their societal attitudes are different to our country. Now, although India may have a growth or may have a development in some aspects like IT and other related fields, their societal background and also their societal perspectives are still in certain areas are primitive. So they do not recognize women as equal to men. So that is this is one of the commonplace scenarios in India and Bangladesh. So that is why they have focused only on women when they enacting this domestic violence act. But in Sri Lankan scenario, it is not that. It's applicable to both genders.
So I think you brought out a very valid question in terms of this the gender-based violence, right? Specifically with regards to how Sri Lanka has legislated that is much more comprehensive when it comes to that. So moving on to a very quick question from one of the other panelists. I would like to direct this question to Ms. Eranga Disanayake. What do you think is the importance of learning gender-based violence and domestic violence, especially from the perspective of a law student?
Thank you very much, Ravin, for the question. So before answering the question, let me thank for having me for this discussion. And I feel super privileged and honored to be in the panel with my respected and beloved senior, Mr. Sabumal Bandare, who is an expert in the area. So talking about why it is important to learn about the domestic violence as law students, actually, I personally wish I had never talked about this topic, but unfortunately, we have to, because as Sir also explained, today the domestic violence has become a daily occurrence and a common topic today. So the problem is actually most of the people think that the domestic violence is limited to a mere incident of husband getting drunk and beating the wife, simply like treating the wife in a cruel, inhuman or degrading way. But domestic violence is not only that. And also some people think that it's only limited to a certain class and a level in the society. I mean, they think that this only happens in the lower or middle class families, but not in other levels. But what we have to realize is that domestic violence domestic violence is such a vast area, and it has a huge scope, especially a deep-rooted area that we can see in the society. So what I see is, as future legal professionals, it's very crucial to understand the complexities in the issues, and especially the relevant laws, especially the impact they have on individuals and the societies as a whole. Because the first thing is that there may be a lot of silent victims actually who are affected with the gender-based violence, maybe with the domestic violence. Actually, sometimes they don't know whether they have affected with this. They don't have the capacity to understand whether they have been affected with domestic violence. So for this, the main reason that I identify this, the lack of the lack of awareness about the laws relating to domestic violence. So as law students, you have you should have a kind of a responsibility, a huge responsibility to raise awareness about this domestic violence and the related laws from the ground level. So in order to raise awareness, I think it's very important to have a clear and a thorough understanding about the law first. So that's the very first thing. And also, as future legal professionals, it's very important to be aware and learn about the effects of domestic violence cases, because most of the effects are unseen to the surface. As Sir mentioned, not only the physical damages, right? So there may be a lot of invisible effects. That means not having visible signs of cruel treatment, but also there are psychological damages and mental distress, sometimes the emotional damages. So what I need to highlight is that this is kind of a very sensitive area. So and also sometimes we have to deal with the children, the feelings of the people, sometimes with depressed clients in your future as legal professionals. So most importantly, what you have to remember is sometimes the victims may be your parents, sometimes maybe your friends, your children's, very close family members. So as law students, it's very important to learn about these laws and to be empathetic, build an kind of an effective approach by your own to deal with these types of cases, I guess, because I think sometimes we have to be very careful, like not to have a technical application of the law, and you have to be very well aware about the law in order to give them a proper advice to take the necessary actions for that kind of a problem. So it's very important to have a thorough understanding about the laws. And the other thing is, in Sri Lanka, what we believe is we have an adequate law, as also explained about the laws in our Act in 2005. Actually, it's providing a robust and an adequate legal framework for domestic violence. But what we see as the real problem is that having the lack of legal awareness, because even the lawyers, some lawyers in rural areas maybe, so even the lawyers today, they are not completely aware of the act. And the other thing is actually for as lawyers in the future, so you have to have a proper understanding, and you should know exactly the scope, how to interpret the law in a creative way. For an example, I would say, let me share this example. So if there is an issue relating to a marital rape in Sri Lanka, happened in Sri Lanka. So actually we don't have a proper and a direct law to address this issue and to take some actions. But through the Domestic Violence Act, sometimes at least we can try to have some kind of remedy for this kind of an issue. So I think as law students in the future, you have to have a good knowledge, a proper understanding about the act to interpret in a creative way. And the other thing is also when we have a proper understanding about the law and about the act, I think we can easily identify the loopholes or gaps in the law. So if we can do a comparative analysis with the other jurisdictions, so definitely we can identify what kind of gaps and loopholes that exist in the current legal framework. So definitely be as the future legal professionals, you have that capacity to take necessary actions to suggest new reforms and do further research on this and have comparative analysis with other jurisdictions and submit new proposals for new reformation. So that's also one reason that as law students, you have to be very well aware about the domestic laws. And sir will also agree with me, in the future, definitely if you want to become a civil law practitioner, definitely you have to deal with civil cases such as divorce and maintenance, like that. So in such cases, I'm pretty sure that having the knowledge about domestic violence, the laws relating to the domestic violence, the gender-based violence, it's crucial and it's really important to have that knowledge, because the thing is, these areas, the divorce or maintenance or whatever the other laws, these laws are interconnected. So because of all these reasons, simply I think as law students, if you want to be an expert in the area of domestic violence and in the civil practice, as legal professionals, definitely you have to be aware of all these domestic laws. I think, Ravin, I answered the question.
Yes, indeed. And thank you very much for that in-depth analysis of why this is so important for the law students. And I think you touched upon very two important points in your answer, which is firstly on the victims, right? What happens to these victims and the issues that they have to face once they undergo domestic violence, right? And secondly, on the note of how even even how certain lawyers are not really aware of the different the developments that we have in terms of the domestic violence. So touching upon both of these areas at once, I would like to direct this question to our chief panelist, Mr. Sapmal Bandara. Sir, the question that I am forwarding to you is essentially, how do you suggest we support victims of domestic violence, and what kind of mechanisms do you think are there or can be established to raise awareness in this area?
Yes, Arvind, that is a very pertinent question, and also that I think it is very important to increase or to enhance the awareness of these domestic violence laws among the general public. So that is one very important and very imperative thing we must do. That is, we must enhance the knowledge of general public with regard to these laws. And other one is that we need to improve the public confidence and public confidence of the system, where now you see even though some are aware of the existence of these laws, some people are very reluctant to use these laws for their benefit. Because now, let's say, for an example, if a person is suffering from domestic violence, still there may be some reasons for that person not to come before a law and to take the reliefs which are available or ensured by law. Why? That is because although the law has provided certain substantive law, now I read an article recently with regard to this domestic violence, and in fact, the United Nations organization has clearly indicated that this prevention of domestic violence is a state responsibility, where the state holds a serious responsibility in preventing domestic violence. Because now I firmly believe just merely enacting a legislation will not suffice, where you must have to establish supporting institutions. You must support this mechanism, because now, although the parliament, now, as I said, I really admire the current or the present provisions contained in the Domestic Violence Act. I think it's very comprehensive. It's very comprehensive, and it contains very vast details, and it's very comprehensive. So, however, Now, when it comes to the implementation of the substantive law, there are certain setbacks, there are certain drawbacks, there are some societal attitudes. So we need an attitudinal change towards this law. Now, for an example, although now let's say that we are aware of this law. So there is law where now if a person is in a domestic environment, is continuously or is being abused physically, so this act is available. Now, we should not misunderstand that this is the only law that is available for a person who is being physically abused. So if a person is being physically abused, this is one of the laws that you can use to prevent that. But apart from this domestic violence law, there are criminal law where the penal code prohibits certain physical attacks. So you can resort to a criminal remedy as well. But this is in addition to that. So my point is that although people are sometimes aware of these provisions, they are reluctant to go before courts because they have to face the repercussions. Now, one thing is that in Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, there is no punishment. There is no punishment for the offender. Now, there will be a summary inquiry, and if the magistrates or the court is satisfied that there is a domestic violence already occurred or likely to be occurred, he can issue a prevention order. What is prevention order? Prevention order is an order preventing the relevant person, that is the aggressor, from entering into residence or entering into the workplace of the victim or entering into the school of the victim, so on and so forth. So this is only a preventive measure. So prevention orders. So where do we go after that? So where does it take after that? So once a prevention order is issued, that is also only for a maximum period of 1 year. So thereafter, what happens? So now, practically, now, do you think that if a person is being abused at home, would go to court and have a prevention order for 1 year? And then what happens? And what if the person, after going to courts, fails their attempts? Then the aggressor will continue to do it. And we know that in the recent past, we have heard a lot of violent conduct, violent behaviors, and sometimes some of these conducts had ended up in murders, right? So it can go up to that level. So one of the assurances that we can give, we should give to the victims is that you are being protected. Now, there is a Victim Protection Act. So there are a number of legislation to secure the rights and to protect victims. However, one of the main, as I said, the biggest issue in preventing the domestic violence is public unawareness. So their lack of awareness is one problem. And the other one is, even though people are aware of this, they do not have adequate support. They do not receive adequate support from the institutions. Now, the institutions may be from the police, it may be from courts, maybe from the family, from the extended families. So they do not get this institutional support, and then these laws would become futile. So Ruin, my perspective or my personal opinion would be, in order to implement these laws very successfully, you need to develop this institutional support as well.
So I think you brought out two very important points during your answer there, which is on the level of, especially now the fact that you spoke on how it is the state's responsibility, right? Not just to implement certain things, but rather to enforce them. And also this point that you brought out with regards to the prevention and the focused emphasis that you placed on that. If you were to dive deep into these two specific areas, how do you think can both accountability and prevention be further improved from the status quo?
Yes. Now, one is accountability. Accountability, you can enhance the accountability among in terms of this in relation to this process with results. You know, if people tend to believe in this process only if they see results. So if they are convinced that these laws are adequate enough to protect or safeguard their rights, then they will definitely trust. Otherwise, these laws will be of no use if the people do not trust. So therefore, in order to build or in order to enhance this public trust or this public perspective, you need to ensure that you receive something or something effective and something productive or something efficient. So therefore, it is up to the system, the current system, and it is up to the state to ensure that process. So by doing that, you can enhance the accountability. And also that now, even though some of these laws are enacted, the access to justice is a real issue in this country. Where you would see that based on their geographical restrictions, based on their social restraints and economic confinements, people are not so everyone are not equal in getting access to justice. Sometimes people who are really in need of getting access to justice are being deprived of some economical or some social or some other obstacle. So therefore, one other thing, now for an example, now in United States, you have a number, domestic violence, there's a domestic violence call center. You have a number. Now in Sri Lanka also, I think there is a number like 119 you can call the particular, but nobody knows that. It is not in our common knowledge. So there are numbers. So you must make public aware of these things. So if you are equipped with these things, and now honestly, after the enactment of this Domestic Violence Act in 2005, a majority or there was a significant drop in domestic violent activities, because now people are little aware of this law and they are not tend to commit any domestic violence, because they know that they have to face some repercussions. But still, it needs to be developed, and public awareness and institutional support and the state involvement should be enhanced and increased. And with that, you can have an effective and effective system to cover this area.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think once again, in your speech, something that I picked up was this fact of accessibility. And actually, I would like to divert this question to one of our co-panelists, Mr. Gimansuri Bandara. So Mr. Sapmal Bandara was actually talking about accessibility to the various kinds of protections you are entitled to under law, right? And he rightfully mentioned that there are various avenues of such. For example, the financial constraints that you may have, but the social constraints that you might have. And one such social constraint that might come into light is, what about the male victims, right? Obviously, when you talk about domestic violence, as Ms. Eranga rightfully pointed out, it is not this typical myth that we believe that it's the drunk husband beating the wife, right? That is not the only type of domestic violence that we see. And it could be vice versa as well. So, but there's this social stigma surrounding this. So what do you think, what is your opinion on the importance of learning gender-based violence and domestic violence, especially as a law student, not being a law student too long back yourself, especially in the perspective of a male? What do you have to add to that?
Thanks, Ravin. First of all, I would like to mention that it has been a privilege listening to Mr. Sapmal Bandara and his expertise, and he did a fantastic job explaining all those important areas in terms of law. And also my colleague Eranga, she also added some valuable contributions to this webinar today. Now, as Ruin questioned, now I am going to discuss something not directly related to like the law and the legislation, because I think Mr. Sapmal Bandara covered that, Sapmal sir covered that like without leaving anything out, and that was like a perfect explanation of everything that you need to know. So I would like to focus a little towards the practical and the social side of this, something that we normally miss out. As Ruin asked, this social stigma about domestic violence, and as he mentioned, that it's not always women or children for that matter, right? Like when we say domestic violence, the traditional conventional picture you have, as Eranga mentioned, it's basically a man abusing a woman or like a child, right? But of course, it could be anyone, which is why we use gender-based violence. We say domestic violence, right? So it's violence against someone. So first of all, looking at male victims, number one, I think you have to be open about it. Now, if you are facing as a male, if you are facing domestic violence, this whole conventional idea that as a man, as a male, that you are not supposed to show that you are weak and you are supposed to hide. If you are going through something, it would make you look weak or less of a personality, less of a man. That is a very bad stigma which we need to break. As you know, if you are a victim of violence, you need to come forward, right? When you are doing that, you are encouraging others, right? So it doesn't have to be a woman always. Even if you are a man, if you are facing domestic violence anywhere at the hand of someone, you should come out and you should speak, and you should be very open-minded about it, right? Also, looking at it from a male perspective. Now, I'm certain that there must be a lot of young male law students and maybe young male not law students, just young men in this meeting right now. So for them, other than the advice that you should be vocal about like these things and the whole social stigma that, like, you know, being vocal about facing domestic violence as a man would, like, you know, make you any lesser is completely false. That, like, you know, you deserve justice, like just like any other victim of domestic violence. So you should seek justice for yourself. You deserve it yourself, right? Also, the other thing is, if you are thinking about the female victims, there could be an instance where as a male that you might not exactly understand what a female victim goes through because it is not relatable to you, right? So especially as a young male law student, learning about gender-based violence is very important, because if you are, first of all, if you are a male and if you can't understand the sort of violence females go through, you need to have some empathy towards that. You need to sort of like be understanding, sensitive about that. You should sort of learn to look at it from their perspective. And it's very important for you to, especially to be a lawyer and be in the legal profession, it's very important for you to have empathy and look at it from the other person's side, right? When it comes to this gender-based violence and domestic violence, it is very important. Secondly, even if you are not, like, if does male-female difference aside, even if, say that you are blessed to be coming from a family background that doesn't have domestic violence. If you are blessed to be coming from a peaceful, healthy family background, you might not be able to relate to someone who's coming from a background of domestic violence. So in those cases, you have to have a lot of empathy. You should be able to look at it from their perspective and understand what they are going through. And for that, you need to be sensitive, right? I would like to add one more thing, and I would conclude so we can go to the Q&A. One more thing, that's this recent trend I am seeing in social media. Now, there's something I noticed, perhaps I should mention it. I am seeing this trend of gender-based violence against men sort of like being used against as a rebuttal when someone talks about gender-based violence against women, right? So the thing is that if you are speaking of men's rights, that should not be spoken as a rebuttal against women's rights. When someone speaks about women's rights, you should not bring up men's rights as a rebuttal. So same goes for gender-based violence, domestic violence as well. We acknowledge that men also go through domestic violence and we try to help them. But, you know, it's good to speak about domestic violence against men, but I'm seeing these young boys sort of like on social media most of the times in comment sections that whenever someone talks about domestic violence against women, that as a rebuttal, they bring like men also go through that to deny or avoid talking about the female victims. And that should not happen. Basically, victims are victims and everyone deserves justice, right? So it's good to talk about male victims, but not in a way to undermine the female victims or like as a rebuttal against when someone talks about female victims. Like every case, every victim of domestic violence deserves justice, male or female, and we should do everything in our capacity to ensure everyone gets justice. Right. I think we can go to the Q&A now, Robin.
Thank you very much, Zigma, for that very elaborate expression on the gender-based violence, especially in the context of men. And especially now the fact that, you took it, how this is being used as a weapon against the stereotypical gender-based violence that we see, and how it should not be used as a weapon against that, and how, violence is violence irrespective of whoever is facing the consequences. So we'd like to thank once again our three esteemed panelists for the wonderful insights that they shared and for answering a lot of questions. Personally, a lot of questions that came from my end, and very well explained. I think coming back to Mr. Sapmal Bandara, who explained some of these legal things in a way that anyone could understand it, and how Mr. Gimhan and Ms. Eranga gave this perspective of the law students and how a perspective of a man, how it applies, right? So I think it's wonderful, the session that we had, a very enlightening session, I must say. And now I would like to give this opportunity for our excited audience as well, because I've seen that the chat box has been exploding essentially with questions throughout the session, and we have seen that a lot of the participants are raising their hands as well. But before we move on to the Q&A session, somebody, is there a way we could share the answers to the poll so that we can get a gist of what our participants think? All right, here you go. So I think kind of divided, very, very divisive results that we are getting, especially on the first question, which is the Domestic Violence Act gender neutral, allowing both victimized husbands and wives to make a case against their spouse, or is it gender biased, allowing only the wife to make a case against the husband? We have 48% of the audience saying that it's yes, and 52% saying that it's no. So I think very divisive question there. And the second question is the scope of the Domestic Violence Act limited to just spouses, or does it extend to other relationships as well, such as grandparents? So I think there we have the majority, 76% saying that yes, it extends to other relationships, while 24% is saying that no, it is limited to spouses only. And the third question is that can a child take action against domestic violence within the household? 60% of the audience says yes, a child can take action, while 40% says no, a child cannot take action. So I think good to see that the answers are not one-sided and there's a lot of diversity. I believe Mr. Bandara could add on to that during his answers to the Q&A session as well and take that into context as well. So without further ado, let us dive deep into the Q&A session. I know that some of you have raised questions in person as well. We'll be taking them on a mixed basis. So there are a few questions in the chat box. There are a few of you who are raising your hand who want to bring out your questions. So I encourage you to keep your hands up and let us move ahead with the questions. So the first question that I'm getting is from the chat box. And the question, I think, essentially goes to Mr. Sapmal Bandara. So the question is are there any particular laws related with psychological abuses? If so, what are those acts?
Yes. Well, psychological abuses are amply covered by the Domestic Violence Act, number 34 of 2005. So as I mentioned during my during my answer to the first question posed to me by Ruin, now in our law it covers both physical abuse and psychological abuse. So psychological abuse is that if a person is being treated in a manner inhumane, cruel, or degrading manner, then it constitutes a psychological abuse. So psychological abuse and also humiliating manner. Now, humiliating manner is also included. So if a person is acting towards another person in a cruel, inhuman, degrading, and humiliating manner, that constitutes a psychological or emotional abuse. So emotional abuse is covered in the Domestic Violence Act.
Thank you very much. And there's another question that I would like to direct towards you as well, sir. That is, what are the loopholes of the current way of punishment according to legislation regarding the domestic violence?
Yes, I think this is also a very important question. Now, as far as my perspective or my opinion is concerned, there is no punishment in the Domestic Violence Act at all. So it is a prevention order. That is what you can get as your ultimate result. So there is no punishment for the perpetrator. It's only a prevention order. You can prevent your perpetrator from entering into your residence, your school, your workplace, or any given premises or place. So apart from that, there is no particular punishment offered to the perpetrator in terms of the Domestic Violence Act. But let me tell you this also. Now, in Domestic Violence Act, it defines what are the physical abuses are. So as I said, physical and emotional abuses, both components are covered in the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. So physical abuses are described or mentioned in the Domestic Violence Act. So now, if you see the Domestic Violence Act, in the first schedule to the Domestic Violence Act, it has a list listing out what are the physical abuses which comes under the Prevention of Domestic Violence. All offences from section 293 to 365 of the Penal Code are considered as physical abuses. 393 is murder. Starting from that, 365 is grave sexual abuse, and in between there are a number of offences that can be committed against a body, where it can be a rape, incest, grave sexual abuse, it can be simple hurt, grievous hurt. So there are number of offences. For those offences, you can take the perpetrator before law in terms of the Penal Code also. So it is up to you to decide whether you want to restrict the person from entering your residence, or you want to deal with the person according to law and bring him to the criminal justice system.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. And there's another question that I would actually like to direct towards you as well. I think this is a very important question raised by Manori Vijayakul on the topic of how we can help people, right? I mean, when it comes to helping people, that is also kind of a tricky area. You need to know when you're allowed to help and when you're really not, right? So I think the question that she brings out is that what are the types of interventions a third party can make to assist a victim of domestic violence?
Yes, I think, Ruin, that is a very important and very pertinent question. Whoever has posed this question, I'm very thankful, because I think this would be the ultimate objective of all these webinars, all these awareness sessions. This is what, because people, as I mentioned and as I described during my presentation, that people are sometimes reluctant to go before law for so many reasons. So we need to assist people. We need to support people. We need to help victims to go before law. So now the types of intervention the third party can make to assist victims of domestic violence is, in one hand, this is not covered by the Domestic Violence Act, but this is something outside, where you can always give assurance to the victims that you would support and you would definitely back them, and that you would be right throughout the process with the victim, and that you would ensure to safeguard the rights and give that confidence to the victim. So that confidence is very vital Because now in most of the cases, people are reluctant to go before court because they do not have this assurance that support from third parties. So the third parties can play a very pivotal role and very vital role in supporting the victims and giving them this much needed assurance and support. And apart from that, now there was a question in the question poll also, whether a child can institute action in terms of domestic violence. Now, it is like this. Now, I saw that diverse answer. It is like this. A child himself cannot go before courts on his own because of the age barrier. But a child can go before court against a domestic violence incident through the parents, through a police officer, through a person with whom the child is residing with, and also with a designated officer or assigned officer by National Child Protection Authority. So that is a third party, and those are third parties involved in this Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. And there are also other social, let me put in this way, organizations, social organizations who are readily supporting the victims of domestic violence activities. Women in Needs are go there, so there are plenty of social organizations as well. So you can get the help of all these organizations. And if you do not have any of these, I think what we should do is, Ruin, I'm again thankful to the person who had asked that question. What we should do is, we must spread the message to each and every one of the society, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their age, irrespective of their race, everything. We must spread the message that you don't worry, your rights in the domestic setup is amply covered by this Prevention of Domestic Law Act, and do not worry, do not fear, do not scare. If some person violates your rights, you must go before courts. So third parties can, and they really can assist people in coming before courts.
Thank you very much, sir. I think clears out a lot of the misconceptions that you have with regards to the area, because sometimes you hear this prevalent saying, do not get involved in something that is not really your problem. But I think in this status quo, it's extremely important that if no one is getting involved, we try to do something, right? And that's the whole point of this awareness session. So thank you very much for clearing out those the legal background of that. So moving on to the next question, we have a question from the individual with the username Jaya, who says, with regard to domestic violence, persons with disabilities, in particular, women with disabilities and children with disabilities, are powerless and voiceless. The situation is remarkably highlighted in underdeveloped countries such as Sri Lanka. What arrangements are available at the grassroots level in order to protect their rights? Sir?
Yes, I think, Ruin, this particular question is a very broad one, and this involves domestic violence and other rights of the disabled and underprivileged also. So let me give a brief answer to this in this way, that Domestic Violence Act, as I mentioned earlier, it's a gender neutral, and it applies to all genders equally. So, and it covers everyone, even persons with disabilities, and also women in disabilities and children. And there is an additional safeguard for women and disabled offered by the Constitution itself. Under Article 12.3 of the Constitution, the government can always enact special laws with the to the benefit of children, women, and disabled. So, acting upon those provisions, the government has, I think, the Parliament has introduced laws time to time to guarantee the rights of the disabled and other underprivileged people. So in terms of the topic that we are discussing today, since it's confined to the domestic violence, I would say that it has a equal applicability and all persons are equally covered despite their abilities or disabilities.
Thank you very much, sir. I think the next question, which is an anonymous question, I'm moving really fast right now because I think we're supposed to have things up by 9, but since these are very important questions, I'd like to quickly put them across as well. So the next question, which is an anonymous question, is I think very much applicable to the Sri Lankan context, which is at a situation where the police officers are being biased towards one party in resolving a dispute, what are the supports that the affected party can look for?
Yes, I think this is also a very important question in this way. That is, now there is a serious misconception and misapprehension among our general public that now we must go before courts only through police. So that's a very serious misapprehension. Now, in terms of domestic violence law also, that is a myth where you don't have to go to the police at all, because you can straight away go to court without the assistance of police at all. Now we know that this particular is a fact where the police sometimes they're biased. Sometimes the word sometimes may be an understatement in a way, but we know that is the general awareness. We all are aware. So they are not neutrals. They are not impartial. So this can happen. So my advice is you do not have to go to the police at all, because you can go to courts on your own. You can bypass the police. And in case if the police is biased towards a particular party, or the police is attempting to manipulate certain things within this legal process, you are not out of remedies. You can always take actions. You can either complain that to higher police officers in the police department itself, or you can go to the police commission and make a complaint against the relevant officers who are making bias orders and directions. And also you can complain to the Human Rights Commission. You can file a fundamental rights application. So there are a variety of remedies available to you. And as far as the Domestic Violence Act is concerned, remember that you do not need to seek the assistance of police at all. It is you can go to courts without the assistance, or without the help, or without the support of the police. It's not an essential route for you to go to courts.
Thank you very much, sir. And answering very practical questions, I think, to tackle some of the unfortunate realities.
Honestly, Ruin, if these are very practical questions, I'm very happy to answer these questions, because these are some day-to-day situations that we all encounter with. So it's very good.
Very true. Thank you very much, sir, and for answering those in a very crystal clear manner that everyone can understand. I think there are. I would like to pair up two questions that are separate questions into one, in the best interest of time. So the first question is actually an anonymous question, which is how much statistically significant is domestic violence against women than men in Sri Lanka? But I think something that goes along with it together is the fact that I think this is asked by Tivyesh Karunakaran, which is the abuses of males are not addressed in our society. What can we do with that? I think this was basically touched upon before in Mr. Surya Bandara's answer. But
yes,
so what do you think? Can you add on?
Yeah, I think Ruin Gimhan answered the question very broadly, and he in fact marvelously explained the situation where not only women but also males are also being sometimes victimized. So, well, I'm not too sure about the statistics or the ratio of the violations, but however, what I can say is Domestic Violence Act or Prevention of Domestic Violence Act is a gender neutral act. So men and women and all other genders are also equally covered. So I think since Gimhan had amply covered that point, it need not to be elaborate more. And honestly, I'm not too so conversant with the exact statistics, the number of complaints that that are received by women and men. I'm not in a position to give a precise answer to that, but I know that what I can say is both it's a gender neutral act, as Gimhan correctly stated. Anyone can use the act to prevent any form of a domestic violence.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. And just to take one last question, I think there's one audience member who's interested in taking a question. Since we couldn't, give any opportunity to one of the audience members today so far, I would like to give this individual one opportunity. It is Ravindranath Vijayanathan. Ravindranath, if you are ready, you can ask your question now. You can unmute and ask your question.
My question is to Mr. Bandara.
Yes.
I would like to know what is the recourse available for parents. Now we see, parents being abused by children. They have sons or daughter-in-laws, and now sometimes they're thrown out to the road, or even sometimes they're being forced to go into some place where without their will, without their acceptance, they are forced to stay. So, Mr.
Yes.
Bandara, what sort of a recourse do they have? How do they, tackle this issue? Can they also go under this act? And
yes, definitely. This act also helps the elders, protects the rights of mothers, fathers, grandmothers, grandmothers, grandfathers. So this act covers all that categories. So you can use this act also to prevent any domestic violence being caused to a parent by a child, or you. I will tell you, if you can give me a moment, the applicability of this law is very vast, where a number of persons can come into this act, where initially it is spouse, ex-spouse, and cohabiting partner, right? And mother, father, sister, brother, immediate your siblings, and your grandparents, siblings, parents, children of your siblings, children of your distant relation. So all of them are covered in this act. So it's a vast area covered by this act. And in addition to that, there is a protection of elders' rights act in Sri Lanka, where if an elderly parent is being victimized by a child, in addition to resorting to a remedy under Domestic Violence Act, you can always complain it to the there's a board, elders board, so you can take action in terms of the prevention. The rights of the Elders Act.
Right. Thank you very much, sir, for answering that question as well. And ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are out of time for today's session. It has been an action-packed 1 hour, more than 1 hour, in fact. I would like to thank our guest, Mr. Sapmal Bandara, for actually coming out here and explaining all, I think, as mentioned multiple times throughout the session, for explaining all of these legal matters in a way that it is really easily absorbable by anyone who does not even come from a legal background. Because I think this is exactly what we need to simplify the law, simplify the legal framework in a way that the common layman understands, right? And I would like to thank you for that, for making this crystal clear, and for yet finding a way to make it as elaborate as possible, so that all of us, including myself, got a very clear idea regarding all of the matters that we discussed today. And I would also like to thank Mr. Ranga Disanayake and Mr. Gimhan Suribandara for also taking time off their schedules to be here with us today, and for sharing their unique perspective from a law student's point of view and also from a male's point of view to answer some of these important questions. And also would like to thank our very engaging audience, for bringing up those right questions, for asking questions that are actually important in the status quo, for asking those questions that would maybe someone else wanted to ask, but did not really want to go ahead and make that choice. So thank you very much for asking those timely and important questions. And we really appreciate you being with us till the end of the session. Also, would like to thank the IDM Nations campus for creating this platform, for creating this opportunity, Munivara, Sambhavi for the organizing, and Anushika for the being the brains behind this event. So thank you very much, everyone, and hoping to see you all in the next session, in the next event that is down the line as well. With that, I would like to wrap things up. Hope you learned something of importance, and hope that you will be able to take that first step towards, maybe not the first step, but maybe the second or the third step towards ending domestic violence or to creating a better situation in the world. Would like to hand it over to Anushika now. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Ravin. Thank you, all of you, the well-learned panelists. Thank you, Sapamal sir. Thank you, Mizaranga. Thank you, Gimhan, and Munivara and Sambhavi for taking part on this session and bringing a wonderful session for experience for our students, as well as the outside participants who have gathered today. I hope all of you had a quick idea, or like within a short period of time, we gained a lot of information. So don't worry, we will continue these kind of sessions throughout the year, as I said in the beginning. So on behalf of IDM Nations campus at Buckinghamshire University of UK, we warmly give our gratitude to today's panelists. Thank you so much. And we won't take much time, so it's now the past 9 o'clock in the night. So thank you everyone for being here and engaging with your questions. As Ruin quite rightly said, you bring up some wonderful questions which others could not, would have heard or would have asked, would have got the opportunity to ask from other platforms. So we are going to bring more and more live topics to discuss and make forums and get engaged with these discussions. Thank you everyone for taking part on today's session, and we'll see you next month with another important topic. Thank you.